Welcome to the Two Boots Word Vault podcast. This episode is the first of two parts of a recording from the tribute to the great Minnesota writer Frederick Manfred, which took place at the MCN6 television studio on January 20th, 2024. This episode features the Tributary Reading host Ted King, Siouxland native Jim Lewis, poet Scott Vetch, and myself, Tim Young. Part 2 features the poet Diane Jarvenpa, also known as Diane Jarvie, and the poet and storyteller Danny Klecko.
God, that was loud. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it. I gave you a bunch of you got these handouts. Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. American Ideals. And a political action group co-founded by Walt Disney issued a pamphlet advising producers on the avoidance of subtle communist touches in their films. Its counsel revolved around a list of ideological prohibitions such as don't smear the free enterprise system, don't smear industrialists, don't smear wealth, don't smear the profit motive, don't deify the common man, don't glorify the collective. On July 29, 1946, William Wilkerson, publisher and founder of The Hollywood Reporter, published a trade view column entitled A Vote for Joe Stalin. It named as communist sympathizers, including Dalton Trumbo and a dozen others. In early 1948, all the Hollywood 10, it was 13, somehow got knocked down to 10, were convicted of contempt and each given a 1-year prison sentence in 1950 for un-American speech. Un-American. I think most of you have heard my views on what's un-American and what to do about it. So in 1950 up through, and almost everyone in this room knows about this. You were a kid. I was a kid. We all heard it. The commies. Now it's something else. Doesn't matter. These people were here from the beginning of time, the censors, the oppressors, the book burners. They've always been here, and they will always be here. And we have a responsibility as writers to write the truth. Whatever your truth is, don't back down from these sons of bitches. These days, the big fluff is about woke. You can get in trouble and get banned because you're too woke or because you're not woke enough. Woke, communist, doesn't matter. There's always a monster out there and they're always looking for him. And if you're a writer, if you haven't pissed somebody off somebody isn't mad at you, then I want you to ask yourself, am I really that good? Or am I just not doing my job? Here's a list of the Hollywood 10. They aren't the only ones. The Congress indicted 300 people approximately. Writers, artists, actors, and they are out to get you. And again, if they're not out to get you, are you doing your job? You tell the truth, somebody's going to get pissed. People have called me names: racist, unwoke, transphobe, asshole. In fact, I don't think there's anybody in this room that hasn't called me asshole, but still, do your job. I spoke truth to power. Power didn't care. Oh, you're the guy with some truth? Yeah, Power says. Just set it right there and I'll take a look at it later and I'll have my people get back to you. You know, I spoke truth to Power, but I don't think Power heard me. Power just farted loudly. Now, how can we explain this? Is this like theories of antimatter and matter colliding? Is that what it is? Can truth and power exist at the same time, in the same room, in the same Congress, in the same mind? It's a mystery to me. I'll choose truth. So it's a spiel about responsibility and purpose in being an artist. And then I wanted to mention something about craft, which is the other equally important part. And that pertains to this reading about Frederick Manfred. Like, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I spell it lowercase letters, A-R. I got this friend of mine, his name is Al, he's a sculptor. I do some sculpture. Al's a sculptor. I spell it big S-C-U because he's a master of the craft. I get to go to hang in his studio and be surrounded by this work, and it's like, how lucky can I be? This is wonderful to be here. I'm privileged because he masters the craft, and I'm in awe. And when Tim Young got a hold of me about this idea here, and yeah, Frederick Manfred, I remember, I read some of him, you know, I'll take a look. And I had a couple of books that I hadn't looked at in years. So I dug them out and I started reading them. And before I finished the first page, I had to stop and go, holy shit. This is right. This is a real thing. This is what I wish I could do. And maybe it'll inspire you guys too, because it's that good of stuff. So I think I'm really lucky. I feel grateful that Tim came up with this idea and got a hold of me, and we got a hold of Stuart, and we're able to do this today. And I promise rest of the day won't be so punitive once I step aside. And here's Tim Young.
Oh, thanks a lot. I have a lot of thank yous. This is a big deal for me. I want to thank Tom and Don Cassidy and Scott from Eat My Words. Make sure you buy a book over there. Want to Stuart and the guys here at MCN6. And I talked to Ted, and I wanted this to be as close to the tributaries in the past. So we didn't have Dave Erickson here, but I want to thank him because this is what created Tributary. All of these guys, all the work that they've done, and it's important to me, and I was ever so grateful that Ted agreed to let us do this. The idea started when my neighbor, Jim Lewis, and we were out for the neighborhood in August, the neighborhood night out, and we're out on the street and we're talking, and I don't know how we got around to it. We started talking about Fred Manfred, how I didn't think he was appreciated enough. I graduated with a BA in English from the University of Minnesota. I knew nothing about him when I graduated. I mean, that's a shame. In the middle 1970s, I was a cattle inspector. When I got out of college, I was a cattle inspector in southern Minnesota. The very area where Scarlet Plume is set. I knew nothing about that. I barely knew about the Dakota conflict. As Ted said, those assholes, they've been here for a long time, they're going to be here. And they were there in 1862. I didn't know anything about that. In the early 80s, Mike Hazard put out a little video, American Grizzly. Look it up on YouTube. It's great. It tells you all about Fred. And it's like, oh my God, I should have known this. Well, then I started really getting into Fred. And you know how it is when you're in college. I had my 3 favorite writers. Well, all of a sudden, Fred is right there. Right next to John Steinbeck, as far as I'm concerned. Because they're both from the land, from the earth. And it meant a lot more to me that I had been working in southern Minnesota for a couple years. I mean, I knew those chokecherry trees. I knew those little tributaries that go into the Cottonwood River and the Cottonwood into the Minnesota River. I knew that. I knew all those places. I also knew the places in South Dakota. My grandfather was a cowboy from about 1905, went into the World War I. After that, came back, went back out in northern South Dakota. And I went out there and I looked around that area. I know the land. And Ted, or Fred, well, Ted too, but Fred comes out of the land. And I look at it this way. Those of us who are writers, what we do is we take the experience from the land, from our personal experience, and what we write is the aroma, the scent, the odor of experience. That odor spreads a lot farther than we individuals spread. And so I wanted to do something to honor Fred and the land that I know and the words. He was not appreciated, I think, as he should have been appreciated. And the words that I've read over the years, they just come in and they flood me. My senses just are enlivened simply reading. And then that's not enough. Then I have to go back and crawl around like Fred did on the ground. That makes me alive. I wanted to ask writers to join me. And Jim Lewis, when we talked, and he told me about that, turns out he grew up right down the road. I want to invite Jim Lewis to come up. I want to talk a little bit about that first. Can you tell us a little bit about the land in the area you grew up?
Yeah, I was born and reared on a farm about 14 miles from Laverne and about 14 miles from Blue Mountain State Park, where the interpretive center was Frederick Manfred's home. I didn't know Frederick Manfred growing up, although my mother went to a garage sale in the late 50s, early 60s at Fred's home and purchased a carpet. And our living room at home had a carpet from Frederick Manfred's home. It was a leopard print, which was not typical of farmhouses in southwestern Minnesota. So I felt a kinship to whoever owned that. Unfortunately, I didn't know anything about Fred Manfred until I left southwestern Minnesota and started to discover Minnesota authors. And when I discovered Fred, I was immediately in love with him. When I think of the area that I grew up in, rolling hills, wind, the wind is ever present in southwestern Minnesota. I didn't realize that at the time, but coming home after having left southwest Minnesota, the wind was always there. And now when I go home, there are windmills dotting the landscape. I think of whiteout blizzards, which were common for us. I remember being snowed in on the farm for more than a week. School buses couldn't get through the rural roads. It was a very exciting, fun time. I didn't appreciate southwestern Minnesota until leaving it and coming back. We lived in Rock County, and Rock County was well named because there are rock outcroppings everywhere in Rock County. It is the rose quartzite rock, and it's one of the hardest rocks on the face of the earth. Now it's used for polishing purposes instead of industrial diamonds because it's cheaper to work with than industrial diamonds. But when you go to southwestern Minnesota, almost any of the little towns around, or Sioux Falls, South Dakota, you'll see these wonderful buildings built of rose granite stone. And on the way into Blue Mountain State Park, right next to the interpretive center, which was Fred's home, there is an abandoned quarry. And that quarry provided a lot of the rock that was used to build buildings in Laverne. My memories of southwestern Minnesota are now much more pleasant than they were then. I grew up at a time when the message was loud and clear from all kinds of different sources that if you're going to succeed, you have to get out of here and go somewhere else. And that meant going to the city. A lot of us listened to that message and left southwestern Minnesota, much to the detriment, I think, of southwestern Minnesota. But I've selected a piece from one of Frederick Manfred's first novels, The Golden Bowl. This was before Frederick Manfred was Frederick Manfred. He didn't change his name until the early 50s. The Golden Bowl speaks to the Dust Bowl years, and I am particularly touched by this passage because it speaks to both the despair of the Dust Bowl years and the hope that people clung to during the Dust Bowl years. So I'm reading a piece called Murray Comes to the Thor Place. Murray said dryly, "Well, it's a nice country, but you need water." "Oh, well, we'll get some," Pa Thor said hopefully. "I feel my leg aching up again. And it's one of the best weather vanes in the country, never fails. And right now it seems to be aching around for a change in the weather." He looked up at the sky for a sign of a cloud. "I'm almost sure we'll get a change tonight. Ache is pretty strong." Murray grunted as he dried his face on an old towel. "Well, I've been aching for years now, every bone in me. And if each ache had meant a cloud, the world would have washed away by now. Pa Thor stilled and settled on his heels on the steps. Kirsten sat down beside him. Then presently Pa Thor stirred again. He coughed and said, well, the dew always helps a little, though freshness greens up some. Yeah, and helps fry 'em better when the sun gets high. Well, it'll be all right. Someday when the rains come again, the land will turn green and lift the hills and roll again. I know it will. He looked dreamily over the land. That'll sure be nice when she cracks over the land. That'll sure be nice when she cracks with growing things. It sure will. There'll be bright greens and chickens pecking away under the tall grain. Well, we're liable to have a bumper in a year now. I can't tell you how many times I heard that from my dad and other farmers in the area. Murray murmured, disgusted to himself. He waited for Pa Thor to get up to wash, and then took the old man's place on the step beside Kirsten. He fumbled with his cigarette makings. They were silent together. There was only the noise of Pa Thor splashing his face with water. Kirsten sat still as a watchful creature. Soon Ma Thor came to the door. You can come in now, she said. They filed in slowly. Murray looked quickly around. The house reminded him of his house. There in the back to the north was the room where the family slept. Its door opened near the wall. Here in the kitchen, they were assembled about the table against the south wall. The black stove with the nickel trimmings stood against the center of the west wall. The window opened on either side of it, and he could see the fields stretching away to the rim of the earth. An old, well-oiled shotgun hung over the stove beneath the worm elbow of the stovepipe. A dish cabinet and a cook working table stood against the east wall. There was a window in the center of the wall. The curtains were gray and frayed and much washed. There was an atmosphere of neatness about. Murray's face lightened a bit. When he turned to the table, he saw Kirsten had been watching him, and he smiled briefly. Ma Thor said, Mister, you can take the chair there across from Kirsten. Pa, pull your chair up from under the window. Pa Thor groaned a little as he pulled the chair across the room. My leg does ache a little harder this morning. Sure, Pa, sure. That's good, Ma Thor said comfortingly. Pa Thor shifted in his creaking armchair and rubbed his leg. Ma Thor pushed the plates around with a little nervous gesture. We ain't got much. We just got some tapioca and some bread and coffee. We used to have some bacon, but, well, that's all right, Murray said, sliding a portion of tapioca onto his plate. This looks pretty good to me. There was a brisk smell of coffee in the room. After a moment, Murray felt comfortable. He expanded a little. Sure nice of you folks, taking in a stranger like me. Pretty nice. Very. And then he added hastily, of course, I know how farm folks is. They're all friendly. My folks was too. Ma Thor asked, how long has it been since you left the farm? 4 years ago. 4 years. He looked at his plate. Golly, that's a long time to be nowhere at all. Golly, and I ain't done nothing since. If this keeps up, I won't have nothing to look forward to, nothing to look backward at. Pa Thor hitched his chair closer. Son, you're pretty broke. Yeah. Then after a few ticks of silence, he added, yes, pretty broke. Pa Thorn went on craftily, you know, you act like you think it ain't gonna rain in this country again. Murray looked at him directly. Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think it is.
Thanks, Jim. Now, I don't know about the others. I'm not going to tell you a lot about Fred. You can just go on Wikipedia, get all his data and stuff like that. I wanted to bring the flavor and the aroma of Fred's work. And one of the things that I'd ask the others, and I'll do the same, is to read a passage that gives a flavor. Then, if you have a poem, I asked them if they had a poem that in some way, maybe derived out of Fred's work, maybe it was influenced, maybe it is similar in flavor, but something to carry that aroma forward. Fred was a seed. He's a procreator for Minnesota writers. We're here carrying on. One of the things I wanted to read was from Scarlet Plume, since I spent so much time down in that area. I went back a little while ago and started looking at the places the book talks about. So I want to read a section from Scarlet Plume. To me, this is poetry in prosaic form. She threw aside the wolfskin. As she was about to get to her feet, she noticed that her toes and shins gleamed as though greased. Wonderingly, she touched them, then smelled her fingertips. Her nostrils opened. Scarlet Plume had more than just watched over her and fed her. He had also doctored her, as any true medicine man was required to. He had treated her bleeding skin with some kind of native salve, herbs in a film of venison grease. She stepped outside. The sun shone glinting just above the steep bluff across the stream. Tilted glades of grass gleamed light green between the trees. Damn, that's a good line. Tilted glades of grass gleamed light green between the trees. There was a chill in the air, as if there might have been a frost during the night. Leaves were shivering off some of the ash trees, sifting down the slopes like lavish throws of gold coins. A single wild plum stood like a decanter of dark wine in a far ravine. The buckskin leaves of the scrub oak hung motionless. She tripped down a green mossy path. Silver-tinted black moss grew on the underside of a thick-armed grapevine immediately beside the path. She found Scarlet Plume's watering place, a dam of rocks and twigs thrown across the stream, much like a beaver might build. She could make out individual pebbles on the gravelly bottom, red and gold and black and green. She glanced around to make sure she was alone, then shed her tattered tunic. I like that one too, shed her tattered tunic. Gold and naked, she stepped into the pool. The water had an edge to it, as if it had been run through a filter of ice. She shivered. She moved into the water until it touched the backs of her knees. She cupped water over her elbows. Aye, it's cold. She waded in until water lapped under her seat. Then, taking a daring breath, she dropped in. She came up, spluttering, flailing her arms. She cried out in a pleased shock. She splashed herself some more and took another plunge. Fred's son-in-law, Tom Pope, wrote the introduction to the second edition of Riders of Judgment. Riders of Judgment is probably one of the finest books I've ever read about cowboy life. It's about the Johnson County wars in Wyoming. As I mentioned, my grandfather was a cowboy out in South Dakota. And back in 1990, when Desert Storm was building, a friend of mine wanted poems against Desert Storm War. And so I wrote this poem. It's called Standing Still, a poem for the Desert Storm. Back in Dakota after World War I, Gramps worked the range at Siston. Now, Gramps had been gassed somewhere in France. When revived, he thought he'd found heaven. But the nuns and nurses floating in white convinced him he was truly earthbound. Never one clever, he now had a ghost to help him survive with the foolish. At home on the prairie, he rode with the wise, old men, Indians, and the weather. But the boys from Texas came to town loudly. Now, remember who was president in 1990? That Texan, that oil man? This was actually, I'm sorry, I have to say, I wrote this as a protest poem, but said it in my Gramps time. The boys from Texas came to town loudly, pretending to have all the answers, looking for greenbacks in the old one's gold. They thought to clean up by gambling. Cowboys who travel are not always right, often foolish. They're just blue braggarts. Just because you're clever doesn't mean you have sense, because wit without wisdom is nonsense. The cowboys brought a Brahma with bayonet horns to fight in the ring with a bison. They bet on the bull because of his snort, his stomp, his chomp, and his cussin'. With eyes like the devil crazy at God, his froth dripping stink and slobber. The Brahma raised dust, fainting and fooling, running the ring with his fluster. Old Buffalo stood calm like a tree, his beard in the breeze waving, his soft eyes watching the incredible excuse of an animal pretending to be wild. Old Buffalo chewed, calm like a creek, his blood but a river in August. Never worried, just aware. He'd turn when he needed, like a flag in inclement weather. With blunderbuss foolery and a blast through his nose, Brahma rushed for the bison. With hooves of lightning cracking the thunder, Brahma had the power and the glory. Gramps and the Indians had bet on the bison and the true demeanor of the wild. Defend yourself, but don't waste your God on the hook of another one's hatred. Old Buffalo paused and stood to the bull, who charged like a train toward gold fields. Then, faster than a swallow, flying in a whirlwind, old Buffalo danced aside with ease. A flick of his hump, a twist of his horn, and the belly of Brahma was a puddle. The battle was over. The old one grazed as still as a black night of drizzle. With no cave to return to, no cedar for shade, old Buffalo had to graze in the ring. The cowboys were chastened. Gramps gathered his coins. The Indians quietly went home. Scott Vetch is up next. I had Scott over for my series in St. Paul a while back, and I asked Scott for a bio at the time, and this is what he sent me. Scott is a carpenter who enjoys drinking whiskey and listening to conversations between right and wrong, and he seldom takes sides. Mr. Scott Vetch.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me here. And thanks, Danny, for a lot of help with that bio. Yeah, my great-grandfather homesteaded in that area of South Dakota, northwest of Sioux Falls in 1881. Yeah, both sides of my family are pioneer farm people all the way through. So place is really all I got, and this is the place I love, and that's what I really like about Frederick Manfred, is his love of place and the people that land formed. So I'm going to read something here from his first book, The Wind Blows Free. It's called Setting Out from Sioux Falls. Fred walked over to a Standard Oil station down the street. An old gentleman with brushed, stiff gray hair and freshly ironed blue trousers was sitting inside with feet up on a battered desk. The place was oily neat. The old gentleman gave Fred a sour look. Another bum looking for a handout, I see. Fred checked his own clothes. His burgundy trousers hung in a straight crease all the way to his tan Oxfords. His red tie was still snugged up neat into his shirt collar. Fred smiled. I see you got out of bed on the wrong side this morning. What do you want? I could use a couple maps, South Dakota, Wyoming. Do you drink gas? Homebrew beer, yes. Gas, no. Then you can't have any. Suppose I bought a candy bar. The old gentleman swung his feet down and propped upright out of his swivel chair. 4 quick strides and he was standing behind an open candy case. What do you like? O. Henry? Baby Ruth? It made Fred smile some more. He set down his suitcase and ambled over. The O. Henry was bigger than the Baby Ruth. I think I'll take the short story over the home run. Come again? The old gentleman's hair ridged up under his blue attendant's cap. You threw me a curve there, son, and I'm a fastball hitter. You played ball? With the old Sioux Falls Canaries. Hey, I always wanted to pitch against them. Who'd you pitch for? The old gentleman asked. Doon. I've heard about him. Got a long-legged kid pitching there. Nah, that can't be you, can it? Your guess is as good as mine. Hell, take all the maps you want. Fred asked, what did you play? Shortstop. Then you were part of that double play combination with Swede Risberg. The same, and was he good? Risberg had been kicked out of the American League for throwing games while playing for the White Sox in a World Series with the Cincinnati Reds. Fred was curious to know what Risberg was like in real life, but decided the old gentleman might not like to talk about Risberg's shady past. There'd been some talk that Swede Risberg had too many friends in the underworld of Chicago. I better have a candy bar anyway. For later on, when I'm down the road a ways, I'll take the O. Henry. The old gentleman handed him the candy bar. What was that about taking the short story over the home run? Fred dug a nickel out of his collection of loose change and handed it over. a fellow named O. Henry wrote short stories. I didn't know that. Fred stepped over to the Standard Oil map rack and took a map for both South Dakota and Wyoming. Both covers showed a pair of gray geese winging their way across a deep blue sky with a red car below zooming along a blue road. Both goose and car were headed east, not west. The land was shown in purple with a white halo along the horizon. Thanks. Don't mention it, and the next time you throw me an O. Henry curve, telegraph it a little, will ya? I'm only a 241 hitter. Fred laughed. Them I always had the most trouble with. Out on the street again, Fred looked east up 16. No cars in sight. After a little thought, Fred decided he better walk out to the west end of town, there to be sure to catch any Sioux Falls traffic heading west. He walked under more huge elms. Some of the underbranches were dead. The lawns and porches were mostly neat. Fred kept glancing over his shoulder on the watch for rides. A drayman came by. Too short a ride. A block further along, a jitney full of yelling young toughs, all a high school age, roared by, out open. Hey, long gears, how's the weather up there? Why don't you grow up and find out? Fred yelled back with a smile. Highway 16 jogged left several blocks, then speared straight west. The houses slowly turned drab and the lawns became more littered. A freshly painted combination filling station and cafe glinted near the last stoplight. Two trucks waited to one side of it. The drivers were inside having a cup of coffee. A good place to hook rides. Fred set down his suitcase. He checked his necktie and fly and got out his smile. He was ready. Across the street stood the last house. The lawn around it had been watered just enough to keep it green. It was almost an eyesore, it was so lovely. Looking closer, Fred spotted a private well. The fellow had been lucky enough to hit a good vein of water. So I'm going to read something here. It's place, just another place thing. It's called Back When Grown-Ups Told the Truth. One Saturday, Dad and Grandpa took me fishing on Lake George. Rickety paint-peeling beer joint cabins ringed the shore like thirsty mutts. We followed a boat rental sign down a path between banished washing machines, engine blocks, and 55-gallon drums. At a picnic table overlooking a wooden dock, rental business was conducted to the twang of Ernest Tubb as the vast dishpan of Lake George lapped its Anoka sandplain shore. My head was filled with the mythic northern pike flashing on the Schmidt beer sign, as vivid as blue damselflies helicoptered above lotus green lily pads. A parrot on a perch said things Grandpa laughed at. While Dad decided between 14 feet and 16 feet, between a 5-horse Johnson and a 6-horse Evinrude, the rental man's Salem-smoking wife thought I might enjoy seeing their 2 pet squirrel monkeys. She led me into the living room where they perched like crabby little men atop a curtain rod. Monkeys don't crap in a box like cats, so the curtains were stained and the house smelled like a diaper pail. She picked up one monkey and carried it outside to the table where the grown-ups drank beer. A black kitten jumped up and the monkey pulled it around by the tail, its rear feet dangling. The kitten, starved for attention, didn't care. The rental guy cracked another beer and said there was a northern in the lake that had broken the lines and dreams of every fisherman that hooked it. Lures and hooks dangled from its snout like stolen jewels. On still summer nights, you could hear them rattle like broken chains when it shook its head. It was man against fish. We trolled the weed line in the dog day heat, sun beating our hatless heads, dragging daredevils and sucker minnows round and round through that swampy bathwater without a strike. Hour after hour we held our poles and hoped. That Jade Johnson 5-horse chugging hypnotically, yellow ball of the sun sinking into the trees. Feverish, I wondered if you could hear the lures rattle as it swam, or if it raised its head above the surface and shook them like a Loch Ness monster. In the twilight, Dad cut the engine, and Grandpa tied us up to the dock, fishless except for our bucket of half-dead minnows. The rental guy was sorry we'd struck out, said you can't win 'em all, and showed me a couple boards in the dock he'd had to replace. Said one night, lying in bed, he woke up to a heck of a racket. It was a clear moonlit night, and he looked out the window in time to see that goddamned fish smash through his dock and rattle those hooks at him for no reason but pure mean. He said the necklace of spoons and crankbaits hanging from that ugly mug had to be worth $30. On the way home, I asked Grandpa how a fish held itself out of the water to shake its head like that, how it could breathe when it did, not tear its skin on all that splintered wood, and how it could eat with a mouthful of hooks. Grandpa said it sounded like one hell of a fish, probably part crocodile, and asked me if I ever heard about the time it rained so hard that he nearly drowned. Thank you.